Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm reading to you this morning with our friend Moosey. I rescued him out of our classroom. He's doing fine. Misses all of you. Bye. So he'll be hanging out with me. All right. So today we are ready for the 5th chapter. Yesterday, the last thing that I read. It's important to reread so you don't forget. I said, standing before the biggest and oldest and the most king-like of them all, I suddenly had an idea. And he was, of course, talking about the big trees. And this is when the story really gets good. This chapter is called The Old, Old Tree. I knew enough about the Catskill Mountains to know that when the summer came, they were covered with people. Although great-grandfather's farm was somewhat remote, some hikers and campers and hunters and fishermen were sure to wander across it. Therefore, I wanted a house that could not be seen. People would want to take me back where I belonged if they found me. I looked at that tree. Somehow I knew it was home, but I was not quite sure how it was home. The limbs were high and not right for a tree house. I could build a bark extension around it, but that would look silly. Slowly I circled the giant trunk. Halfway around, the whole plan became perfectly obvious. To the west, between two of the flanges of the tree that spread out to the roots, was a cavity. The heart of the tree was rotting away. I scraped at it with my hands. Old, rotten, insect-ridden dust came tumbling out. I dug on and on, using my axe from time to time as my excitement grew. With much of the old rot out, I could crawl in the tree and sit cross-legged. Inside, I felt as cozy as a turtle in its shell. I chopped and chopped until I was hungry and exhausted. I was now in the hard, good wood, and chopping it out was work. I was afraid December would come before I got a hole big enough to lie in. So I sat down to think. You know those first days, I just never planned right. I had the beginnings of a home, but not a bite to eat. And I had worked so hard that I could hardly move forward to find that bite. Furthermore, it was discouraging to feed that body of mine. It was never satisfied, and gathering food for it took time and got it hungrier. Trying to get a place to rest, it took time and it got more tired. And I really felt I was going in circles and wondered how primitive man ever had enough time and energy to stop hunting food and start thinking about fire and tools. I left the tree and went across the meadow looking for food. I plunged into the woods beyond that, and there I discovered the gorge and the white cascade splashing down the black rocks into the pool below. I was hot and dirty. I scrambled down the rocks and slipped into the pool. It was so cold I yelled. But when I came out on the bank and put on my 2 pairs of trousers and my 3 sweaters, which I thought was a better way to carry clothes than in a pack, I tinged and burned and felt coltish. I leaped up the bank, slipped, and my face went down in a patch of dog-toothed violets. You would know them anywhere after a few looks at them at the botanical gardens and in colorful flower books. They are little yellow lilies on long, slender stems with oval leaves dappled with gray. But that's not all. They have wonderfully tasty bulbs. So if you don't know, a bulb is the part of the plant that grows underground. So you can dig up some of these bulbs and eat them. I was filling my pockets before I got up from my fall. I'll have a salad-type lunch, I said as I moved up the steep sides of the ravine. I discovered that as late as it was in the season, the spring beauties were still blooming in the cool pockets of the woods. They were all right raw, that is, if you are as hungry as I was. They taste a little like lima beans, which I don't like lima beans. I ate these as I went on hunting food, feeling better and better until I worked my way back to the meadow where the dandelions were blooming. Funny, I hadn't noticed them earlier. Their greens are good, and so are their roots. A little strong and milky, but you get used to that. So side note, some people still will cook dandelion casserole, so you don't eat the flowers or the stem, you eat the leaves and the part underground. A crow flew into the aspen grove without saying a word. The little I knew of crows from following them in Central Park, they always have something to say. But this bird was sneaking, obviously trying to be quiet. Birds are good food. Crow is certainly not the best, but I did not know that then, and I launched out to see where it was going. I had a vague plan to try to noose it. This is the kind of thing I wasted time on in those days, when time was so important. However, this venture turned out all right, because I did not have to noose that bird. I stepped into the woods, looked around, and could not see the crow, but noticed a big stick nest in a scraggly pine. I started to climb the tree. Off flew the crow, which made me keep on climbing in face of such discouragement. I don't know, but I did. And that noon, I had crow eggs and wild salad for lunch. At lunch, I also solved the problem of carving out my tree. After a struggle, I made a fire. Then I sewed a big skunk cabbage leaf into a cup with grass strands. I had read that you can boil water in a leaf, and ever since then I had been very anxious to see if it were true. It seems impossible, but it works. I boiled the eggs in a leaf. The water keeps the leaf wet, and although the top dries up and burns down to the water level, that's as far as the burning goes. I was pleased to see it work. So here's what happened. Naturally, all this took a lot of time, and I hadn't gotten very far on my tree. So I was fretting and stamping out the fire when I stopped with my foot in the air. The fire! Indians made dugout canoes with fire. They burned them out, an easier and much faster way of getting results. I would try fire in my tree. If I was very careful, perhaps it would work. I ran into the hemlock forest with a burning stick and got a fire going inside the tree. Now I want you all to think to yourself, make a prediction. What do you think is going to happen? Will he be successful? Will his fire get out of hand? So I'll give you about 10 seconds to make your prediction. All right, ready? Thinking that I ought to have a bucket of water in case things got out of hand, I looked around desperately. The water was far across the meadow and down the ravine. This would never do. I began to think the whole inspiration of a home in a tree was no good. I really did have to live near water for cooking and drinking and comfort. I looked sadly at the magnificent hemlock and was about to put the fire out and desert it when I said something to myself. It must have come out of some book. Hemlocks usually grow around mountain streams and springs. I swirled on my heel. Nothing but boulders around me, but the air was damp. Somewhere, I said, and darted around the rocks, peering and looking and sniffing and going down into pockets and dales. No water. I was coming back, circling wide, when I almost fell in it. 2 centennial boulders, dripping wet, decorated with flowers, ferns, moss, weeds, everything that loved water, guarded a bathtub-sized spring. You pretty thing, I said, flopping on my stomach, and pushed my face in to get a drink. I opened my eyes. The water was like glass, and in it there were little insects with oars. They rode away from me. Beetles skittered like bullets on the surface, or carried a silver bubble of air with them to the bottom. Ha! Then I saw a crayfish. I jumped up, overturned rocks, and found many crayfish. At first I hesitated to grab them because they can pinch. I gritted my teeth, thought about how much more it hurts to be hungry, and came down upon them. I did get pinched, but I had my dinner. And that was the first time I planned ahead. Any planning that I did in those early days was such a surprise to me and so successful that I was delighted with even a small plan. I wrapped the crayfish in leaves, stuffed them in my pockets, and went back to burning the tree. Bucket of water, I thought. Bucket of water. Where was I going to get a bucket? How did I think, even if I found water, I could get it back to the tree? That's how citified I was back in those days, like from the city. I had never lived without a bucket before. Scrub buckets, water buckets. And so when a water problem came up, I just thought I could run to the kitchen and get a bucket. Well, dirt is as good as water, I said as I ran back to my tree. I can smother the fire with dirt. Days passed, working, burning, cutting, gathering food, and each day I cut another notch on an aspen pole that I had stuck in the ground for a calendar. So an aspen is a type of tree. So he has a big branch of a tree, and every day he carves out a little notch to mark the passing of time so he can know what day he's on. We will read one more chapter, and this one is called, I Meet One of My Own Kind and Have a Terrible Time Getting Away. 5 notches into June, my house was done. I could stand in it, lie down in it, and there was room left over for a stump to sit on. On warm evenings, I would lie on my stomach and look out the door, listen to the frogs and nighthawks, and hope it would storm so that I could crawl into my tree and be dry. I had gotten soaked during a couple of May downpours, and now that my house was done, I wanted the chance to sit in my hemlock and watch a cloudburst wet everything but me. This opportunity didn't come for a long time. It was dry. One morning I was at the edge of the meadow. I had cut down a small ash tree and was chopping it into lengths of about 18 inches each. This was the beginning of my bed, and I was planning to work on it after supper every night. With the golden summer upon me, food was much easier to get, and I actually had several hours of free time after supper in which to do other things. I had been eating frogs' legs, turtles, and best of all, an occasional rabbit. My snares and traps were set now. Furthermore, I had a good supply of cattail roots I dug up in the marsh. If you ever eat cattails, be sure to cook them well. Otherwise, the fibers are tough and they make more chewing to get the starchy food from them than they are worth. However, they taste just like potatoes after you've been eating them for a couple of weeks, and to my way of thinking, they're extremely good. Well, anyway, that summer morning when I was gathering material for a bed, I was singing and chopping and playing a game with a raccoon I'd come to know. He had just crawled in a hollow tree and had gone to bed for the day when I came to the meadow. From time to time, I would tap on his tree with my axe. He would hang his sleepy head out, snarl at me, close his eyes, and slide out of sight. The third time I did this, I knew something was happening in the forest. Instead of closing his eyes, he pricked up his ears and his face became drawn and tense. His eyes were focused on something down the mountain. I stood up and looked. I could see nothing. I squatted down and went back to work. The raccoon dove out of sight. "Now what's got you all excited?" I said, and tried once more to see what he had seen. I finished the post for the bed and was looking around for a bigger ash to fell and make slats for the springs when I nearly jumped out of my shoes. "Now what are you doing up here all alone?" It was a human voice. I swung around and stood face to face with a little old lady in a pale blue sunbonnet and a loose brown dress. "Oh gosh," I said, "don't scare me like that. Say one word at a time until I get used to a human voice." I must have looked frightened because she chuckled, smoothed down the front of her dress, and whispered, "Are you lost?" "No, oh no, ma'am," I shuddered. "Then a little fellow like you should not be all alone way up here on this haunted mountain." "Haunted?" said I. "Yes, indeed. There's an old story that says there are little men up here who play ninepins right down in that gorge in the twilight." She peered at me. "Are you one of them?" "Oh, no, I said. "I read that story. It's just make-believe." I laughed, and she puckered her forehead. "Well, come on," she said. "Make some use of yourself and help me fill this basket with strawberries." I hesitated. She meant my strawberry supply. "Now, get on with you. A boy your age should be doing something worthwhile instead of playing numbly-peg with sticks. Come on, young man." She jogged me out into the meadow. We worked quite a while before we said any more. Frankly, I was wondering how to save my precious strawberries, and I may say I picked slowly. Every time I dropped one in her basket, I thought how good it would taste. "Where do you live?" I jumped. It was terribly odd to hear a voice, after weeks of listening only to birds and raccoons, and what is more, to hear the voice ask a question like that. So, think about how you would respond if someone found you in the woods. Things to consider. Some people might want to send you back home if they catch you living in the woods. So think about what you would do before I read on. All right, so here's how he responds. "I live here," I said. "You mean Delhi? Fine. You can walk me home." So remember, Delhi was the city where the library is at, close by, but that is not where he lives. Nothing I added did any good. She would not be shaken from her belief that I lived in Delhi, so I let it go. We must have reaped every last strawberry before she stood up, put her arm in mine, and escorted me down the mountain. I certainly was not escorting her. Her wiry little arms were like crayfish pinchers. I couldn't have gotten away if I had tried. So I walked and listened. She told me all the local and world news, and it was rather pleasant to hear about the National League. an atom bomb test, and a Mr. Riley's three-legged dog that chased her chickens. In the middle of all this chatter, she said, "That's the best strawberry patch in the entire Catskill Range. I come up here every spring. For 40 years I've come to that meadow for my strawberries. It gets harder every year, but there's no jam can beat the jam from that mountain, you know. I've been around here all my life." Then she went right into New York Yanks without putting in a period. As I helped her across the stream on big boulders, I heard a cry in the sky. I looked up. Swinging down the valley on long pointed wings was a large bird. I was struck by the ease and swiftness of its flight. "Duckhawk," she said. "Nest around here every year. My man used to shoot 'em. He said they killed chickens, but I don't believe it. The only thing that kills chickens is Mr. Riley's three-legged dog." She tipped and teetered as she crossed the rocks, but kept right on talking and stepping as if she knew that no matter what, she'd get across. We finally reached the road. I wasn't listening to her very much. I was thinking about the duckhawk. This bird, I was sure, was the peregrine falcon, the king's hunting bird. "I will get one. I will train it to hunt for me," I said to myself. Finally, I got the little lady to her brown house at the edge of town. She turned fiercely upon me. I started back. "Where are you going, young man?" I stopped. Now, I thought, is she going to march me into town? Into town? "Well, that's where I'll go then," I said to myself, and I turned on my heel, smiled at her, and replied, "To the library." All right, and that is where we'll stop for today. So, have a really great weekend. I'll see you all Monday. Let me know if you have any questions. Send me a message. I'd love to hear what you're up to. I miss you like crazy. I know we got some kind of sad news yesterday. We won't be back to school. So I will let you know when I hear from Ms. Fitzgerald what our plan's going to be. But I love you all and I miss you. Moosey misses you. And we'll get through this together. So I will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend.